everyone, my name is Cassidy, and I work on product strategy at Centrifuge. Today I'm going to talk about the importance of integrations and collaborations across Polkadot parachains, especially for DeFi. So I believe the only way that we can really achieve sustainable growth in the Polkadot ecosystem is through this collaboration. So I'm going to focus on what we're working on at Centrifuge, together with other teams in the ecosystem. So what is Centrifuge first? Let's see if this clicker cooperates. So here's our mission. Feel free to have a read here. The keywords that I really want to highlight are economic opportunity. That's really our main focus at Centrifuge. So how do we actually unlock this? What does Centrifuge really do? So we take real-world assets and we allow businesses to get financing for them using the Centrifuge parachain. So anything from invoices to real estate to inventory, we take these real-world assets on Centrifuge, the parachain. We mint an NFT that represents this, and then we put them into Centrifuge pools. And right now, these pools are live on Ethereum today and launching very soon on the Centrifuge parachain. And by pulling these assets together, we allow them to actually access financing using DeFi. So Centrifuge is the bridge for real-world assets to access liquidity in DeFi, but the bridge goes both ways, and it's also a bridge for DeFi TVL to actually access the limitless potential and the size of real-world assets that we have, in the real world, and not just crypto-native assets. So here's a look at Tinlink today. There. So we've got over 80 million in total value locked in Centrifuge right now. Again, that's on Ethereum and soon coming to the Centrifuge parachain. This is, just what it looks like. If you wanted to actually go to centrifuge.io, you would be able to click into Tinlink and actually see every single asset, very transparent, very open, that you can just go and look at these assets, look at the different pools that are available. So just a brief overview of some of the stats. So about 85 million in TVL. We have an integration live with Maker where our assets are actually accepted as collateral to back Maker's DAI stablecoin. That debt ceiling is at 44 million. We have 209 current liquidity providers and 12 different pools that are live on Centrifuge. So that's, you could think of that as like 12 different type of assets. And 251 different liquidity providers. Actually, no. Sorry. So right now, the current state of the Dotsama ecosystem, just having like a brief glance, this number isn't necessarily fully accurate, but just to give you a picture of where we're at in the Polkadot DeFi ecosystem, we're about 1 billion in total value locked. This source is from DeFi Llama. I actually showed this screenshot earlier this year, and we were at 2 billion. So there really is a shift in the total value locked in DeFi, not only in the Polkadot ecosystem, but all across DeFi. And we've come a long way, but there's definitely a very long road ahead of us, and there will be ups and downs. But I think this is really where Centrifuge can be key. Bringing real-world assets into DeFi means sustainable long-term growth. So DeFi TVL suffers each bear market. We can see this here in this chart. The top chart here just shows this strong receding of DeFi TVL. Whereas in comparison, we look at Centrifuge TVL, steady growth, sustainable long-term growth is really what we're targeting here. So this is what our focus is and why we believe in real-world assets and bringing them into the Polkadot ecosystem, because we believe that this will actually help DeFi and Polkadot achieve that sustainable long-term growth. Yet we cannot do this alone. Integrations across parachains are really going to be the key here for us. So I want to talk about how some of these integrations actually look. Because, we think this is really where Polkadot has its key use case as an ecosystem is making these integrations easier, more accessible, able for more projects to actually integrate and collaborate much easier than, I would say, in other ecosystems. So what can we actually do with DeFi on Polkadot today? I'm going to take a look first at our integration with Acala. So right now we have an Air AUSD pair proposal live for Kura swap. And so that's an integration connecting the Centrifuge parachain with the Altair parachain, with the Kura parachain. Altair is our Dotsama parachain. That's where everything launches before it launches on Centrifuge. So Air is the native token for Altair, and that pair proposal is live for Kura Acala's Dotsama parachain. The next step there will then be to do the same thing. Once we're able to see that this actually works for the Air token for Altair and Kura, we can implement that same integration using CFG and Acala. Then next would be to bridge AUSD over to Altair first, and that's to be able to fund the different assets that are in Altair pools. And next it would be to bridge AUSD over to the Centrifuge parachain to fund assets on the Centrifuge parachain. And that's super important because the Acala stablecoin is really going to be, I think, the backbone of our ecosystem when it comes to everything from, having this stable currency to transact, but also for us, it's with asset financing and lots of other things that I think we'll see come up in DeFi in the future. So I think lastly, and what I'll touch on a little bit further down in this talk, is using Centrifuge asset pools as different types of collateral to actually back the Acala stablecoin. I think that's going to be super important because the higher and the more diversified the TVL of AUSD is, the more that it's used in the ecosystem, the stronger that it's actually going to be, and the more valuable it will be for all of us in the Polkadot ecosystem to actually use this as a stable currency. So next look, I'm going to take a look at what we're doing together with Moonbeam. Here we go. So I really think Moonbeam is I think it's going to end up being a key for our ecosystem to remove barriers for DeFi liquidity to come into the Polkadot space. So for us in particular, for Centrifuge, it increases our access to DeFi liquidity for financing the assets on the Centrifuge parachain. So right now we're looking at doing that with different stablecoins that are launching on Moonbeam. So that's everything from wrapped USDC to other stablecoins in the future, hopefully. And the more access that we have to this liquidity, the more that we can actually grow DeFi TVL together, right? So this integration is really key to be able to open up that access for liquidity. The other way around, lots of NFTs on Moonbeam will probably get launched in the future. So think of things like NFTs that represent real estate, new projects that are actually coming out with these sort of launches on Moonbeam natively. So I think for those NFTs to then access financing, they could also use Centrifuge. So that, I think, DeFi liquidity movement is really key to go both ways. And then lastly, I think one interesting thing for Centrifuge in the future, and I think important thing, is bridging our pools to be able to access secondary liquidity markets. So right now, when you lock liquidity into a Centrifuge pool, you get a drop or a tin token that represents either a senior or the junior tranche. And those tokens could, in theory, be traded, and being able to bridge those pools to access liquidity for that liquidity that you locked into Centrifuge, I think will actually be super important in the future to help us grow. So yeah, I really think Moonbeam is going to end up being a really amazing access point for DeFi liquidity, making the ecosystem open to many different EVM projects. So from these real-world asset NFTs to DeFi tooling, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things come up, and I'll touch on one of those ideas in a second as well. So just taking a look at what DeFi could achieve in Polkadot soon. Those were a couple of integrations that are actually either live, going live, or very soon on our roadmap for Centrifuge. But there's also a few things that I think are really exciting in the future for this ecosystem and what Centrifuge is working on. So just taking a look at what we we actually have live on Ethereum. We have this integration with Maker. What this does, and what we really try to achieve with this integration, is making DeFi limitless by bringing in real-world assets, because real-world assets have limitless volume, and more resilient by providing an uncorrelated asset, uncorrelated to crypto assets, actually. So this is, I think, a really key integration for growing stablecoins in the space, for making them actually robust and able to withstand things like a bear market, but also like a complete gap in liquidity, which does happen for crypto-native assets. And we've seen things like Black Thursday that even happened with Maker before they actually added real-world assets. So preventing these stablecoins from actually having this this major drop in their value is something that I think real-world assets can really strongly prevent and be a really great addition, I think, to our ecosystem. So another thing that we can accomplish, taking this same structure that we use for Maker, we can bring that to Akala in the Polkadot ecosystem. So the AUSD is still pretty nascent as a stable token. And what this actually could look like is, say some homeowner wants to access financing. The issuer on Centrifuge would calculate the value of this asset. In the future, ideally, and one of the token designs I've worked on is having underwriters, multiple underwriters come into the system to evaluate that risk. Once all that's taken into account, this NFT is minted to represent this asset on Centrifuge chain. It's locked up in a pool on the Centrifuge parachain, and that the financing is represented in this drop token. That would be the senior tranche of this pool. And that drop token is what could be then used on Akala to mint the Akala stablecoin. And then, hopefully, using this really easy off-ramp in the future that I'd love to see happen, to convert it to fiat. So this is really, I think, a very approachable way that we can see an integration between Centrifuge and Akala having a real-world impact. We're already doing this right now with Maker. And I think it's really soon for us on the horizon to be able to do this with Akala. And so I'm pretty excited about this future potential that we have with integrations. And I think going back to Moonbeam, and one of the EVM projects that I think would be exciting to see there is an Aave real-world asset market on Moonbeam. So this is another integration that we have live currently on Ethereum. We have this integration with Aave there. And this is really just, instead of having to go to each individual Centrifuge pool, choose a type of asset that you want to provide liquidity to, you just go directly to the Aave market, you lock in your liquidity in USDC, and it can fund any number of the pools that are live in the Aave market. The issue with doing this on Ethereum, which I think now in the ecosystem is a pretty standard understanding, is that it's so expensive. And it's really unattainable to continue doing it this way. And this is where I think Polkadot Parachains really come in and change the game for these projects and for what we're actually able to do to achieve our mission of unlocking that economic opportunity. So I think I'm really excited for seeing something like this launch on Moonbeam and many different other EVM-based protocols. But I think, we're still so early in the space, and there's lots of other integrations that I think across Parachains we'd love to see to basically enable all these things that we're working on, that we see other projects working on. So that's everything from DEXs across Parachains, the ability to balance liquidity and trade across chain. One event that we hosted yesterday, and something I'd love to see, is governance standards across Parachains. Especially as our ecosystems, our communities grow, we need standard substrate palettes that are accessible, but not only substrate palettes, but tooling, UI, a user experience that when you're involved in the governance of lots of different parachains, it's just intuitive for you. You don't have to figure it out again and again. But these are all things that I think we'd love to see to be able to seamlessly interact across the chains that we have in the Polkadot ecosystem. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, and I really think that we can do that by working together, building these integrations, collaborating more across our ecosystem, There's lots of initiatives that are coming up across Parachains to collaborate a little bit better. But I think, trying to drive the energy here to really start paying attention to that, because it's becoming more and more important for us to really focus on that collaboration so we can grow together, and especially so that we don't repeat the same mistakes as before, or repeat work across our teams. I think I just want to end with a look at our Centrifuge mission again. We really want to create a world where anyone can become an investor and provide capital that borrowers need. And the end goal there is really fair finance. So opening up this access to capital to any business that needs it at a cost that's actually affordable. I do think I have time for some questions. Yeah? Cool.
Well, let's first give a round of applause for Cassidy. So those of you who were here earlier knows how this works. We have time for 2 questions. Exactly 2 questions. Why? Because we're hungry. Lunch is after this. So, for those of you who have a question, put your hand up and a mic will come to you. Send 2 questions. All right. If that's the case, then thank you very much, Cassidy. Lovely talk. And how are you going to miss the window? Go ahead, you first. 1 second. Mike's coming to you.
Hi. So, are you not concerned about over-leveraging the whole system? So theoretically, you're putting your DAI and getting your drop tokens, putting your drop tokens, getting AUSD. And theoretically, I can put it back on the system. So this there's a possibility of extremely over-leveraging the system. And then there's this one highly risk element to this, and then you're trying to put the housing and everything, which are theoretically very stable assets, with this over-leveraged system. Don't you think theoretically this sort of endangers a very stable asset as well?
Yeah, so I think that's just a little bit of a misunderstanding of the flow there. So you're not actually putting the DAI in, getting the drop, and then using the drop to get AUSD. It's actually completely removing DAI from that situation. So I gave the example of Maker of how we're using this specific flow to mint DAI. And that's actually what's reducing the cost of our capital, is that we're using the asset itself, the NFT, to mint DAI, to actually use that DAI to finance the business, the homeowner, whoever. And so in the case of AUSD, we're actually using the NFT to mint drop, and that drop is then able to stand as basically the collateral type for AUSD. So it's only the value of the asset that's used here, and it is over-collateralized. The value that you'd be able to get in financing would be less than the value of the home itself, and that's where these issuers and in the future underwriters would come in to assess the risk and make sure that the value that you're actually financing is adjusted to the risk of actually paying that back. So then there definitely could be orders of magnitude on top of that than everything else you can do in DeFi with the AUSD, but with our system it's directly using the assets on Centrifuge to be able to mint AUSD. And that's good in both ways because you're providing a stable asset to back AUSD, and at the same time allowing this business to access capital for much cheaper than they would if they went directly to a traditional bank.
Question over here.
Hi. So my question is, in the case where you have a house as your collateral, how does the liquidation happen if, let's say, the house market drops?
Good question. So we actually have a full legal setup behind each of the Centrifuge pools. So any liquidity provider is actually signing an agreement with the issuer of each pool. That issuer has a legal entity that's set up, specifically for issuing the assets in this pool. And if an asset were to default, the liquidity provider could actually get that back from the issuer. So last resort is that legal process, but before that it would most likely be auctioning that asset off and using that to pay back the pool. And this is actually also why we have this two-tranche structure, where the liquidity providers in this junior tranche are the ones that would be losing that first. And so using the senior tranche to actually provide the liquidity for something like, do you call it a stablecoin, so that you're actually protected by this buffer of the junior investors. And those junior investors would be probably the issuer themselves taking a large piece of that, or other funds that might be interested in taking that higher risk. But ideally, long term, with our underwriter token design, the idea would be that a group of underwriters are actually taking a big piece of that junior tranche, and so they're incentivized to actually price the risk accurately because they can stand to lose first if that asset were to default.